Lots of pitchers made relief appearances for the New York Mets in 2025. I'm not sure how we're going to get to them all. Welcome back to another edition of the Bleav in Mets pod. That's Jack McKessie. I'm Chris Schubert here talking all things New York Mets baseball. If you missed it, we started our season recap series earlier in the week. You can go back and listen in the podcast feed to our starters episode today. It is the relievers. And Jack, this is what I've decided. I'm going to put these relievers into tiers, into buckets, and I'm just going to shout names at you. And if you want us to stop and talk about one of those relievers, we will stop and go through that tier. If not, we'll keep it moving. Because there's a lot of guys who got in for the Mets, and some of them are worth at least a passing mention, some of which I'm sure there's half of our audience that don't remember them pitching. We're going to do this in reverse order, Jack. In the starter episode, we went from most starts to least starts. I think we do it in reverse order, if that's okay with you.
That's okay with me. I mean, Chris, there are 46 overall pitchers through for the Mets this year, and 39 of them were in relief appearances.
Just before we pressed the record button, you were frantically trying to figure out how you were going to order them on your stat page on the side monitor, and I'm not sure you have come up with what you want to do yet.
I mean, I'm looking at these names, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that guy.
Okay, first bucket. These are pitchers who played and pitched in one singular game for the Mets. So I don't know if we're going to stop here, but I will at least mention them and give them a shout-out. Tyler Zuber, Jared Young, Dom Hamill, Jonathan Pintaro, Travis Jankowski, Colin Poche, Jose Urena, Zach Pop. Anybody in the one-game tier that you would like to talk about?
I mean,
shout out Jose Urena and his 3-inning save that he gave the Mets that one time.
I think that's kind of it. Dom Hamill making his debut and then getting DFA'd. There's not really a whole lot there.
All right, the next tier. We have a group of relievers that made 3 or fewer appearances, but more than one. Sean Manaea, Paul Blackburn, we talked about them in the starter episode. Ty Adcock, Alex Carrillo, Clay Holmes, Frankie Montas, we talked about them in the starter episode. Luis Torrens with his 2 outings, and then Blade Tidwell made 2 outings in relief as well.
Happy trails to Blade Tidwell, who ended up in a trade, and shout out Luis Torrens. His 2 games included 2/3 innings pitched, and one of those appearances included 0 outs recorded.
He got booed off the mound in that game. All right, the next tier up. These are players who made more than 3 appearances, but less than 10, less than double-digit appearances. Justin Hageman, Rico Garcia, Richard Lovelady, Kevin Herget, Genesis Cabrera, Austin Warren, Justin Garza. This is the group of, hey guys, can you just mop up innings for us on days where our starter didn't have it and we're down early? Like, Kevin Herget was the mayor of this. He did this like 4 or 5 times in the second half of the season.
It's kind of funny looking back at like how good these guys, like some of these guys were in terms of how well they were able to pitch in these mop-up innings. Like they were guys that came up and essentially were either DFA'd or optioned back down within a day or 2 of their relief appearance. But like Rico Garcia had a 2.13 ERA with the Mets and ended up, I think, getting picked up by the Orioles at some point this season. So like there were some legitimate success stories here. But, I mean, shout out to these guys for being able to get the Mets through a season that featured, again, 46 different pitchers.
Yeah, and they were just funneled back and forth between Syracuse and the big league level all season long, and they did it with class, every single one of them. All right, the group of relievers that made more than 8 appearances, double-digit appearances, but less than 20. Jose Castillo, A.J. Minter, Chris Davinsky, Danny Young, Dednell Nunez, Brandon Waddell in this next tier.
So we got Waddell is another mop-up guy, so I kind of would throw him into the last tier almost because he had a lot of mop-up opportunities, and that is kind of what I remember him for. Chris Davinsky, I felt, was almost in that tier, but kind of among the best in terms of he gave them 10 outings, 9 2/3 innings, 12 outings, 14 2/3 innings, and a 2.45 ERA. He was a guy that when Edwin Diaz wasn't on and Helsley was tipping his pitches and Chris Davinsky came in the 9th inning, I was like, I'm good with this. He was a guy that I trusted towards the back half of the season.
Not an official Circle of Trust tree member, but he got close. He certainly got close.
And it's devastating to think about what this team could have been able to do with if A.J. Minter had managed to stay healthy for a longer portion of this year, because I think he was supposed to be the main setup guy. He was kind of the guy that the Mets envisioned to be that 8th inning bridge to Edwin Diaz.
He was great.
Brutal that he only got 11 innings in 13 outings.
And he was great. He had a 1.64 ERA in those 13 outings. I mean, he was everything that the Mets wanted when they signed up for a multi-year deal. I want to talk about Dednel Nunez because I think he was supposed to factor in a big way to the back end of this bullpen.
Yeah.
And it just never got there. Like, he came up and command was all over the place, just did not have the confidence. And then he got hurt and he had Tommy John surgery. And I already gave you offline my prediction that Dednel Nunez coming back from Tommy John surgery is going to be the Mets' September call-up for the one pitcher that they're able to add to their roster in September of 2026.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Nunez was a guy that I had circled in red ink on my watch out for this guy in our preseason predictions because I saw what he had done in 2024, giving the Mets a couple of multi-inning outings and giving a little bit more length than your average reliever. He had some really tough games when he was able to come back healthy around May, June, if I remember correctly. And then some outings that were genuinely really good. And then he got hurt and Tommy John in July. So tough season for him, but he's a guy that I think factors into a future plan, even if it's a year and a half, 2 years down the road.
Jose Castillo, just a quick mention, that was a mid-season, early on in the year acquisition from Arizona, and he threw some great innings for this team as a lefty reliever after Minter went down. Okay, now we get into the big names. These are the guys that really carried a lot of the workload for the Mets. And I'm not going to group these by games anymore, but I do think it's important to look at the first couple of guys on this list because 3 of the 4 that are next up in games pitched were the 3 deadline acquisitions for the Mets in Ryan Helsley, Gregory Soto, and Tyler Rogers. I think Rogers was great. I think Rogers was everything the Mets needed him to be post-deadline. I think in the case of Gregory Soto, it was off to a great start, and I think where the season turned is that bad outing that he had in Atlanta where he coughed up the lead. After kind of trotting along in those low to medium leverage roles, the Mets decided to add more to his plate, and I was somebody who campaigned for that. And in his first high leverage spot, it just completely unraveled, and he was never the same pitcher. And Ryan Helsley, you trade for one of the best closers in the National League, and he starts tipping his pitches, and you can't even use him in the 7th inning as a setup guy. It was a bad deadline across the board because you used Rogers a ton, but he wasn't really of the caliber of a Edwin Diaz or a Ryan Helsley to be a closer. And then the other 2 guys that you brought in to be the hard-throwing setup men, they just, for one reason or another, they couldn't get it done.
I think Gregory Soto was what we all kind of expected him to be, someone who was a little bit wild but had the stuff to get strikeouts, had the 100-mile-an-hour fastball and some of the dirty secondary stuff to get out of some situations. But there were a lot of times that he would walk the bases loaded, hit by pitch the bases loaded, like get a 0-2, 1-2 count on a guy and then hit him, wild pitches. And I think that his acquisition was one that the Mets their hand was forced because of the lack of lefties. Yeah. Brooks Raley came back just before the deadline, if I remember correctly, but it was still too early to tell if he was going to be the lefty guy that the Mets needed him to be, especially coming back from Tommy John the year prior. And so with Minter out, with Jose Castillo gone, with Danny Young out, like the Mets really needed a lefty bad, and Soto ended up being that guy, and he was what the Mets expected. Tyler Rogers struggled, I think. I think he was a little bit of a disappointment relative to the expectations as far as he started giving up a lot of fly balls and some home runs late in the season that were really unfortunate. And when he came in with the bases with guys on, like he reminded me of Reed Garrett, where it was like, I don't know if I trust this guy quite yet. And then Helsley's obviously the big miss of the trade deadline.
I'm going to pair the next 2 guys together. There's not really a link, but I think they're both forgotten about. Max Kranick, the 24 games, the 37 innings that he pitched, and then Jose Butto, who was traded for Tyler Rogers. I thought in Kranick's case, I hate that the injury derailed his season because he was certainly a member of the trust tree in my mind. He was somebody that in spring I was like, this dude should be in the bullpen, and he made the team, and he was great, and he was a multi-inning guy, and you just threw anything at him, and he was able to do that for the New York Mets. And in Butto's case, a guy that was supposed to be a starter, They make him into this reliever. He was great in the role last year. They try to get him in that role this year. And it just seemed to have its stops and starts where there were moments where you thought Jose Butto was back to being the reliever that he was in 24. But then there were moments where he couldn't throw strikes. He would give up a ton of hard hits, and it just would unravel. And I think that's what made the Mets comfortable trading him for Tyler Rogers, because if they brought in a reliever, he felt like at that time of the season, he was going to be the roster casualty because he was just too up and down.
Yeah, these are the two guys that I would also have put together in kind of a unheralded hero in a way of the season, and because of the way that they were able to give your multi-inning outings, similar to what the Mets kind of forced upon Reed Garrett down the stretch after these guys were off the roster. And without them, like I was saying for David Peterson in our starters episode, like without some of the multi-inning outings that we got from those guys, like the Mets would have lost some games earlier in the season. And Butto, I think the Mets really felt that loss when they weren't able to get those kind of multi-inning outings from guys not named Reed Garrett later in the season.
Now we can kind of break these down individually one by one with the guys that are left. And the first place I want to start is somebody that obviously if you were giving out an MVP of the bullpen, it would go to Edwin Diaz for the year that he had. But boy, should there be some strong consideration for the 30 games that Brooks Raley gave the New York Mets. I mean, this dude coming off of Tommy John surgery to pitch this well right away, very quickly the Mets were able to go to a place that you don't normally go with relievers coming off of Tommy John surgery, pitching in back-to-back games. It didn't matter the score. It didn't matter the inning. It didn't matter the situation. Brooks Raley was ready to take the ball for the Mets, and he gave them that lefty relief option that they were searching after the A.J. Minter injury. And just an awesome year to pitch that well coming off of injury and to very quickly be somebody that down the stretch, when Helsley was struggling, when Soto was struggling, when Rogers was up and down, he was, after Edwin Diaz, the guy you trusted the most to get 3 outs for this team. Didn't matter lefty, righty. He was just so valuable to this team.
He was a guy that was so interesting as far as what I expected for him coming into this year, I guess, in that, like, it was pretty much nothing because he only pitched a couple of months in 2024 before he had to get Tommy John surgery. And so I didn't know what to expect when he came back in mid-July. I think we were there for his 2025 debut at the David Wright number retirement ceremony, and he looked good. I was happy with how he looked against the Cincinnati Reds lineup, and then he turned into a guy that looked like what the Mets hoped A.J. Minter would have been coming into the year. The 8th inning guy, a left-hander who is able to work against both hitters on both sides, right? So I was blown away by how good Brooks Raley was, given that he was coming off of Tommy John and given that he was kind of thrust into this setup man role even after they made all these deadline acquisitions. Like, he was the guy closest to the top of the trust tree, not named Edwin Diaz.
The next guy up deserves an award because he completed it. He did what we asked him to do. Huascar Brazoban, you look at his baseball reference page, pitched in the first inning, pitched in the second inning, pitched in the third inning, the fourth inning, the fifth inning, the sixth inning, the seventh inning, the eighth inning, the ninth inning, made 4 appearances and extra innings. He did it all. Huascar Brazoban, our guy, did it.
Is there such thing as a super utility man for a reliever? Because
Huascar Brazoban is that guy.
He is it. I mean, talk about another guy that we didn't really have high expectations for coming into the season. A guy that really struggled after he was a deadline acquisition made last season. And then for the first half of this year, at least, he was the setup man. He was a guy that was brought in a couple times in the ninth inning and extra innings, like you mentioned, to close out games because there were some moments where Diaz struggled. And so for Brazoban to give you the versatility to be an opener, to be a closer, to give you the middle innings, to give you the late innings, to be a bridge to Edwin Diaz, like, he really did it all. And I think because of how much the Mets had to rely on him with their lack of trust in other relievers, it kind of led to him hitting a bit of a wall and getting fatigued by the middle part of the season. But he's a guy that I was really impressed by as far as expectations versus performance in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he was an opener, giving you 2 innings some days, and then a couple of days later, he was giving you multi-innings in the 7th and the 8th, handing things off to Edwin Diaz. Other nights, he's the first guy out of the pen in the 4th or the 5th to get it to the rest of the bullpen arms. I mean, it just... I know when you look at the numbers, he had an ERA nearly 4. I think it was 3.81 for the year, and they sent him down at times throughout the course of the year because he kind of lost it a little bit. But, man, he did everything that was asked of him, and overall he did it well enough for the Mets to be able to survive with him in that role. And I don't know if there's another reliever in baseball that has the body of work from 2025 that Huascar Brazoban has.
And even looking at some of his under the numbers stuff, Chris, like I have his StatCast page open over here. He had an 87th percentile ground ball rate, 90th hard hit, 93rd average exit velo, 88th percentile chase rate, 84th percentile fastball run value. Like, this is a guy that was giving you some quality outings when the Mets needed it most. And it was really just impressive how he was able to do it in every single inning and extras of a baseball game.
3 relievers left. Reed Garrett, the next guy up, and a tale of 2 seasons. And I think we've said that a lot here in these early previews because I think it's true. When the Mets were going well in the first half, Reed Garrett was at the center of it, really being that trusted. And the role that he carved out for himself was, if there are base runners on and I need to go to the bullpen, Reed Garrett is the guy. And Reed Garrett was getting the Mets out of those situations. As the season progressed, as the workloads continued to pile up for a bullpen that every night was being asked for double-digit outs, Reed Garrett hit a wall, and it all came tumbling down after that.
In a lot of ways, Reed Garrett's 2025 reminded me of the Tyler McGill experience that we've come so used to understanding through the starting pitching lens. And Reed Garrett was someone who last year was a closer at points of the season. He had some crucial appearances this season as a 7th and 8th inning guy, as the bridge to Edwin Diaz when the Mets were still trying to figure out what their bullpen looked like prior to the deadline. And, I mean, you talk about hitting a wall. I mean, this guy, they kind of just force-fed into the machine over and over again and prayed that he wouldn't break. And eventually, you know, it happened. He broke, and he's going to miss probably all of the 2026 season, which is unfortunate. But the multi-inning outings and the capability. And Brazoban, I know we joke about with the versatility because he pitched every inning, but Reed Garrett's reliability to go out there and give you more than an inning, most of his outings, I feel like, was a crucial thing for the Mets, a crucial tool for the Mets bullpen this season, especially with how disappointing some of the starters were in giving length.
Third most valuable reliever, according to WAR, for the Mets in 2025 was Reed Garrett. The guy who topped that list, worth 2 wins out there in the bullpen, Edwin Diaz, and the elite year that he had, a 1.63 ERA, the 28 saves, just one of the best closers in the game. And I know in the moment, when you're watching these games and Edwin Diaz walks the leadoff guy and you're immediately in trouble and there's danger afoot and you're pacing around the room watching Edwin Diaz try to work out of trouble, it cannot feel like he's one of the best relievers in the game, but he constantly pulled the rabbit out of the hat, pulled off the magic trick, and I don't know if Edwin Diaz is going to come back, and I don't want to do that here in the season recap, but if this was the swan song for Edwin Diaz in a Mets uniform, he went out on top. He went out being their best reliever, their most trusted reliever, and one of the main reasons why they were able to still be in it late is when it got to the 9th inning, he slammed the door shut.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, this looked like the Edwin Diaz we had come to know in 2022 as your absolute reliable workhorse closer that just, no matter what happened on the base paths leading up to the end of the game, like, he was able to get the job done. And I mean, it's represented. You mentioned WAR as a stat for Reed Garrett. Edwin Diaz responsible for 2 wins above replacement as the team's closer. It really just speaks to how good that he was in that role for the whole season.
The only reliever that ended up pitching in more games than Edwin Diaz, the guy who pitched in the most games in the Mets bullpen, Ryan Stanek, the last name up for us to discuss. And I feel like Stanek got too much heat early in the season and then did have a blow up and then couldn't have been trusted. And then by the time we got to the end of the season, he got back to being the reliever that he was in the beginning of the year when everybody was ready to be done with him. It's a weird season to recap for Ryan Stanek because I think early he had those meltdowns in Washington, and that everybody took those couple of meltdowns and said that he sucked when he really didn't. And then he did actually suck, and everyone was done with him. And then he kind of got back to being a good reliever. It's just it was a very weird season for Stanek.
Yeah, I think another encapsulation in one game was the game 162, him being the guy to get allow the Marlins on the board in the fourth inning. I think was kind of just a good summary of the fall of Ryan Stanek from, electric closer in his time with Houston, electric setup man in his time with the 2024 Mets in the playoffs, and then shaky at best, a guy that, like you said, pitched in more games than any other Met this season with his 65 appearances. It just was a very high highs and some very low lows for Stanek this year.
That's it. All the relievers, season in review complete.
I also just want to say really quick.
Sure.
You mentioned the WAR, and I didn't take a look at that until you brought it up for Reed Garrett. How about Brooks Raley being responsible for 0.8 WAR in half of a season of work? Like, we talked about how good that he was for this team, but man, almost a full, a half Edwin Diaz in half of a season. That is a really impressive body of work for Brooks Raley this year.
It's why if you remove Edwin Diaz, he's the MVP of the bullpen, and it's not even close. He was their best reliever after Edwin Diaz, and he only pitched in 30 games. It was just an incredible stretch that he had coming back from the Tommy John surgery. Next up for us, the infielders. The catchers and the infielders, our next season preview. We'll give that to you at the beginning of next week. In the meantime, please rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you want to watch the Bleav in Mets podcast, you can do so over on the YouTube side of things. Jack McKessy, McKessy, the YouTube channel where you can watch the show. We flip sides. Offense next up. It's the infielders. It is the catchers next in our season preview. We'll talk to you then. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.